Even if those values conflict with imperial policy? Chen paused before answering, recognizing that his next words could determine whether this unprecedented diplomatic encounter would end in alliance or annihilation. The weight of his entire civilization's future rested on his ability to navigate the delicate balance between principle and pragmatism. Your Highness, conflicts between different civilizations are inevitable. The question is whether those conflicts are resolved through dialogue and compromise or through the application of superior force. Humanity prefers dialogue, but we're prepared to accept the consequences of our principles. The statement hung in the air like a challenge that could ignite a war spanning thousands of star systems. Seraphina's expression had grown unreadable, and the assembled courtiers seemed frozen in anticipation of her response. Chen waited calmly, having said everything he could to explain humanity's position without compromising the values he had been sent to represent. What happened next would reshape the galaxy's understanding of power, diplomacy, and the true meaning of strength. But none of the witnesses could have predicted the words that would emerge from the Queen Princess's lips, or the chain of events those words would set in motion across 1,000 worlds. Queen Princess Seraphina studied Ambassador Chen for what felt like an eternity, her violet eyes reflecting the complex calculations of someone who had been trained from birth to evaluate threats and opportunities across galactic scales. The throne room remained absolutely silent except for the subtle hum of the palace's energy systems, as if the very building was holding its breath in anticipation of her decision. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a tone that none of the assembled courtiers had ever heard before. Not the melodic authority of absolute command, nor the dangerous silk of barely controlled anger, but something resembling thoughtful consideration. Ambassador Chen, in 3,000 years of imperial history, you are the first representative of a lesser civilization to stand in this throne room and refuse to acknowledge Zephyrian supremacy. Every other species that has achieved spaceflight has eventually recognized the wisdom of accepting their place within our established order. Chen nodded respectfully. I understand that our position is unprecedented, Your Highness. However, I would suggest that unprecedented circumstances might require unprecedented solutions. The galaxy has changed significantly since your empire was founded. New technologies, new forms of government, new ways of organizing society have emerged. Perhaps it's time to consider whether the old approaches are still optimal for achieving imperial objectives. Commander Vextar's mandibles clicked in sharp disapproval. Your Highness, this human speaks of our established policies as if they were failed experiments rather than proven methods that have maintained peace and order across 1,000 worlds. Peace and order, Chen repeated thoughtfully. Commander, may I ask how many military campaigns the Empire has conducted in the past century? How many rebellions have required suppression? How many resources have been diverted from productive activities to maintain control over reluctant subjects? The commander's antennae twitched in irritation. The Empire's military activities are necessary to maintain stability and protect our citizens from hostile forces. I don't question their necessity, Chen replied, but I do question their efficiency. From what we've observed, the Zephyrian Empire spends enormous amounts of resources maintaining control over civilizations that would prefer independence. Wouldn't those resources be better used for exploration, scientific research, or cultural development if your subjects were willing partners instead of reluctant vassals? Minister Kael'thon stepped forward, his expression troubled. Ambassador Chen, your arguments assume that willing partnership is possible between civilizations with such vastly different capabilities. History suggests that relationships between unequal powers inevitably become exploitative, regardless of initial intentions. That's true when the more powerful civilization views the relationship as an opportunity for exploitation. Chen agreed. But it's also true that some of humanity's most productive partnerships have been with civilizations more advanced than ourselves. We've learned from them without being conquered by them, and in some cases, we've been able to offer insights or assistance that they found valuable. Seraphina leaned forward slightly, her interest clearly engaged. Describe one of these partnerships. Chen considered his response carefully before answering. Approximately 50 years ago, we encountered the Valian Collective, a species with technology centuries ahead of our own. They were facing a crisis involving the breakdown of their environmental management systems, which threatened to destroy their homeworld within a generation. And humanity was able to assist a technologically superior species. How exactly? Commander Vexter asked skeptically. By approaching the problem from a completely different perspective, Chen replied. The Valians had developed incredibly sophisticated technological solutions to manage their planetary ecosystem, but those solutions had become so complex that they were impossible to maintain effectively. They were trying to solve their crisis by developing even more sophisticated technology. He paused, ensuring he had the full attention of his audience. Humans suggested that they simplify their approach by working with natural systems instead of trying to replace them. We helped them design hybrid solutions that combined their advanced technology with biological processes that were self-maintaining and self-correcting. The result? Serafina asked. Their environmental crisis was resolved within a decade, and they've since shared their hybrid technologies with us in exchange for ongoing consultation on sustainable development projects. Both civilizations benefited from the partnership, and neither was required to submit to the authority of the other. The throne room fell silent again as the implications of Chen's example settled over the assembled courtiers. The idea that a less advanced civilization could provide meaningful assistance to a more advanced one challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of technological progress and the relationships between species at different development levels. Minister Canthon spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of diplomatic experience. Your example is interesting, Ambassador, but the Zephyrian Empire is not facing environmental crises or technological failures that would require external assistance. Our systems are robust and our capabilities are comprehensive. With respect, Minister, every civilization faces challenges, Chen replied. The more successful and complex a civilization becomes, the more subtle and difficult those challenges tend to be. The Zephyrian Empire may not need help with basic technological problems, but what about social cohesion across 1,000 worlds? What about maintaining cultural identity while governing diverse species? What about adapting to new threats that emerge as the galaxy continues to evolve? Serafina stood and began pacing again, her forearms moving in complex patterns as she processed the conversation. You speak as if the Empire requires advice from civilizations we could eradicate without effort. What makes you believe that humanity has insights that 3,000 years of imperial experience has not already provided? Chen's response was immediate and confident, because humanity has faced and solved problems that the Zephyrian Empire has never encountered. We've developed democratic institutions that maintain stability without centralized authority. We've created economic systems that encourage innovation without destroying social bonds. We've learned to integrate multiple species and cultures without forcing them to abandon their identities. The Empire has integrated thousands of species, Commander Vextar protested. By requiring them to adopt Zephyrian customs and acknowledge Zephyrian authority, Chen replied. That's absorption, not integration. True integration preserves what's valuable about different cultures while creating new synthesis that benefits everyone involved. The Queen Princess stopped pacing and fixed Chen with her penetrating stare. And you believe this democratic integration is superior to imperial unity? I believe it's more sustainable, Chen said carefully. Imperial unity based on submission works as long as the empire remains stronger than all potential opposition combined. But if that balance ever shifts, the entire structure becomes vulnerable because the subject populations have no investment in maintaining it, while democratic integration creates what exactly? Stakeholders instead of subjects. Partners who benefit from the relationship's success instead of subjects who wait for opportunities to escape it. The conversation had reached a critical juncture, and everyone present understood that Serafina's next words would determine not just the fate of the human delegation, but potentially the future direction of imperial policy. The Queen Princess returned to her throne, but this time she sat in thoughtful consideration, rather than formal authority. Ambassador Chen, she said finally, your arguments are provocative, but they remain purely theoretical until tested against practical reality. The Zephyrian Empire has achieved unprecedented success through proven methods. What evidence can you offer that your untested theories would produce superior results? Chen nodded, recognizing that he had reached the moment when abstract philosophy would need to be replaced by concrete proposals. Your Highness, we would like to propose an experimental partnership between the Zephyrian Empire and the United Federation of Earth. A limited cooperation agreement that would allow both civilizations to evaluate the benefits of alliance-based relationships without compromising existing imperial structures. Details, Serafina commanded. A mutual defense and trade agreement covering the border regions where human and imperial space intersect. Human colonies would remain under Federation governance but would coordinate with imperial forces on security matters affecting both territories. Trade would be conducted on equal terms, with both sides offering access to resources and technologies that benefit the other. Commander Vextar's antennae twitched aggressively. This proposal would create an independent power within imperial space, setting a precedent that could destabilize our entire governmental structure. On the contrary, Chen replied, it would demonstrate imperial confidence and adaptability. Instead of appearing threatened by emerging civilizations, the empire would be seen as innovative enough to develop new forms of relationship that serve imperial interests while respecting the sovereignty of other peoples. Minister Kelpan looked troubled. Your Highness, such an arrangement would be completely unprecedented. We have no established procedures for managing relationships with civilizations that refuse to acknowledge imperial authority. Then perhaps, Serafina said quietly, it is time to develop new procedures. The statement sent shockwaves through the throne room. Several courtiers actually gasped audibly, while others stared in disbelief at their future empress. The suggestion that imperial policy might need to evolve was so radical that many found it almost impossible to process. Chen maintained his calm demeanor, but internally he felt a surge of hope that the impossible might actually be becoming possible. Your Highness, if the Empire is willing to consider new approaches to interstellar relations, humanity would be honored to serve as partners in that exploration. Serafina studied him for another long moment, then turned her attention to her advisors. Commander Vextar, what is your military assessment of the risks associated with Ambassador Chen's proposal? The commander's response was immediate and sharp. Your Highness, any arrangement that legitimizes refusal to acknowledge imperial authority creates unacceptable strategic vulnerabilities. Other species will interpret such precedents as signs of imperial weakness and will demand similar treatment. Minister Kael'thon, what are the diplomatic implications? Unprecedented and potentially catastrophic, Your Highness. 3,000 years of carefully established protocols would be undermined by a single exception to our fundamental policies. Serafina nodded thoughtfully, then returned her attention to Chen. Ambassador, you have heard the concerns of my most trusted advisors. How would you address their objections to your proposal? Chen had anticipated this moment throughout the negotiation, and his response was carefully prepared. Your Highness, I understand their concerns, but I believe they're based on assumptions that may no longer be accurate. The galaxy has changed dramatically in recent centuries. New civilizations are emerging faster than ever before, and many of them have technologies and social systems that didn't exist when current imperial policies were established. He gestured toward the holographic displays showing imperial territory. The Empire can continue to rely on traditional approaches, but doing so means missing opportunities to benefit from new developments. Alternatively, the Empire can demonstrate the kind of adaptive leadership that originally made it great by developing innovative solutions. The Queen Princess was silent for several minutes, her violet eyes unfocused, as she considered options that could reshape the fundamental nature of her civilization. When she finally spoke, her words would echo through imperial history for generations to come, though none of those present could yet understand their full significance. Ambassador Chen, she said slowly, You have presented arguments that challenge everything the Zephyrian Empire has believed about power, authority, and the proper relationships between civilizations. Your proposals are radical enough to be considered treasonous if suggested by an imperial citizen. Chen waited silently, knowing that his response to her next statement could determine whether humanity would find a place in the galactic community or face extinction at the hands of the most powerful military force in known space. However, Seraphina continued, they are also compelling enough to warrant serious consideration. The words serious consideration hung in the crystalline air of the throne room like the first crack in a dam that had held back the waters of change for 3 millennia. Every courtier present understood that they were witnessing a moment that would be analyzed by historians for generations, though none could yet predict whether it would be remembered as the beginning of a new imperial golden age or the first step toward the empire's dissolution. Queen Princess Seraphina rose from her throne once more, but this time her movement carried a different quality. Not the restless energy of someone working through a complex problem, but the decisive motion of someone who had reached a conclusion that would reshape the galaxy. Ambassador Chen, she said, her melodic voice now carrying undertones of steel that suggested the full weight of imperial authority was about to be brought to bear. I am prepared to make you an offer that has never been extended to any civilization in the history of the Zephyrian Empire. Chen remained perfectly still, recognizing that whatever came next would determine not just the immediate fate of his delegation, but the long-term survival prospects of his entire species. The careful balance he had maintained throughout the negotiation had brought him to this moment, but success or failure would depend entirely on how Seraphina chose to exercise the absolute power she commanded. The Empire will establish a trial relationship with the United Federation of Earth, she announced, her words causing visible reactions throughout the assembled court. This relationship will be governed by principles that have never been tested in our history, but which your arguments suggest may serve imperial interests better than traditional methods. Commander Vextar stepped forward, his insectoid features betraying deep concern. Your Highness, surely such a momentous decision requires consultation with the Imperial Council and approval from His Majesty the Emperor? Seraphina's violet eyes fixed on her military advisor with an intensity that made several nearby courtiers take involuntary steps backward. Commander, are you questioning my authority to negotiate on behalf of the Empire? Of course not, Your Highness, Vextar replied quickly, his mandibles clicking in the rapid pattern that indicated significant stress. I merely suggest that the unprecedented nature of this arrangement might benefit from broader consultation before implementation. The broader consultation will occur during the trial period, Seraphina stated with finality. If the experimental relationship proves beneficial to imperial interests, it will be expanded. If it proves detrimental, it will be terminated. But the Empire will not miss this opportunity to evaluate new approaches to galactic governance because of excessive caution. She turned back to Chen, who had maintained his respectful but dignified posture throughout the exchange between the Queen Princess and her advisor. However, Ambassador, this trial relationship will require certain concessions from humanity that acknowledge the reality of our respective positions in the galactic hierarchy. Chen nodded carefully. I'm prepared to discuss reasonable accommodations that serve the interests of both civilizations, Your Highness. First, the Federation will provide the Empire with complete intelligence regarding all known threats in your region of space. 50 beings to represent an entire species? The audacity was almost charming in its naivety. When the Calorian Empire had first requested an audience 3 centuries ago, they had brought a fleet of 300 ships and 10,000 representatives. The Morphean Collective had sent delegates numbering in the millions, each one a specialized diplomat trained from birth for the honor of addressing Zephyrian royalty. Seraphina leaned back in her throne, considering the situation. The humans had been expanding steadily through their sector of space, establishing trade routes and defensive alliances with remarkable efficiency. While they posed no military threat to the Empire, their growing influence in the outer systems had caught the attention of Imperial intelligence. This meeting would establish the proper relationship between the two civilizations, with the humans taking their rightful place as another vassal state in the grand tapestry of the Zephyrian Empire. Grant them permission to approach, she decided, but ensure they understand the proper protocols. I will not tolerate the kind of embarrassing display we witnessed when the Tramari delegation attempted to stand in my presence. Commander Vextar's antennae twitched in acknowledgement. Of course, Your Highness. Shall I have Minister Caton brief them on court etiquette? Yes, and make certain they understand the significance of this honor. Few species are granted an audience so early in their development. I am being remarkably generous with these humans. As the commander departed to make arrangements, Seraphina turned her attention to the strategic implications of the meeting. The humans controlled several worlds rich in rare minerals that the Empire could utilize, and their position along key hyperspace routes made them potentially valuable allies. For example, the Federation has developed surveillance systems designed to protect privacy while ensuring public safety. These systems work because our citizens trust that democratic oversight prevents their misuse. In an imperial context, the same technologies might be used for population control rather than protection. Minister Canton stepped forward, his expression thoughtful. Ambassador, are you suggesting that your technology is somehow more ethical than imperial systems? Not more ethical, Chen clarified carefully, but designed for different social structures. Democratic technologies assume that citizens have rights that government must respect, while imperial technologies assume that subjects have obligations that authority must enforce. Both approaches can be ethical within their proper context, but they're not interchangeable. Seraphina found herself genuinely intrigued by this perspective. And how would you propose to resolve such conflicts? Through the same kind of collaborative development that humanity has used with other species, Chen replied. Instead of simply transferring existing technologies, both sides could work together to develop new solutions that serve shared objectives while respecting different values and social structures.
The Queen Princess turned to address her advisors.
Comments? Commander Vextar's antennae twitched in agitation. Your Highness, collaborative technology development with an independent civilization creates significant security risks. Shared research inevitably leads to shared capabilities, which could eventually threaten imperial superiority. Only if the collaboration is viewed as a zero-sum competition rather than a mutually beneficial partnership, Chen interjected respectfully. The Federation's experience suggests that collaborative development usually produces better results for everyone involved, because different perspectives identify solutions that no single civilization would discover alone. Minister Canthon looked skeptical. Ambassador, your optimistic assessment assumes that all participants in such collaborations will act in good faith. History suggests that technological partnerships often become technological competitions when interests diverge. Chen nodded acknowledgement of the minister's point. That's true, and it's why such partnerships require clear agreements about intellectual property rights, usage restrictions, and dispute resolution procedures. But it's also why they tend to be more stable than relationships based purely on power imbalances. Both parties have incentives to maintain cooperation because both benefit from the relationship's success. Seraphina had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention she usually reserved for strategic planning sessions. The concepts Chen was describing challenged fundamental assumptions about how advanced civilizations should relate to each other, but they also offered potential solutions to problems that had plagued the Empire for centuries. Ambassador, she said finally, your fourth requirement will be the most difficult for humanity to accept, but it is non-negotiable if this trial relationship is to proceed. Chen braced himself for whatever demand might follow, knowing that Seraphina's description suggested something that could compromise the Federation's core principles. The Federation will acknowledge imperial sovereignty over this region of space while maintaining internal autonomy over human-controlled worlds. This acknowledgement doesn't require submission or tribute, but it does require recognition that imperial authority supersedes Federation authority in matters that affect the broader galactic community. The throne room fell silent as everyone present processed the implications of this requirement. Chen found himself facing the exact scenario that Federation leadership had feared most, a demand for political subordination disguised as diplomatic accommodation. Your Highness, he said carefully, could you clarify what imperial sovereignty over this region of space would mean in practical terms? The Federation can certainly acknowledge imperial influence and coordinate with imperial policies, but formal acknowledgement of sovereignty might conflict with our constitutional principles. Serafina's expression had grown serious, and when she spoke, her voice carried the full authority of someone who had been raised from birth to wield absolute power. Ambassador Chen, we have reached the limits of imperial flexibility. The Zephyrian Empire has existed for 3,000 years because certain principles are not subject to negotiation. Imperial sovereignty over imperial space is the foundational principle upon which all other relationships are built. Chen realized that he had reached the moment every diplomat dreads, the point where principled negotiation encounters immovable reality. His next response would either find a creative solution to an apparently impossible conflict or end the most important diplomatic mission in human history in complete failure. Your Highness, he said slowly, suppose the Federation were to acknowledge imperial sovereignty while reserving the right to withdraw from this arrangement if that sovereignty is exercised in ways that violate our fundamental values. Would such conditional acknowledgement satisfy imperial requirements? The suggestion created visible tension throughout the throne room. Commander Vextar's mandibles clicked rapidly, while Minister Canthon's expression suggested that he was struggling to process the concept of conditional sovereignty. Serafina, however, seemed to be considering the proposal with genuine interest. Explain how such an arrangement would function in practice. The Federation would formally recognize the Empire's ultimate authority over this region of space, but would retain the right to terminate our presence here if imperial policies require actions that our democratic institutions cannot approve. This creates a relationship based on voluntary cooperation rather than forced submission, while still acknowledging the political reality of imperial power. And if the Federation chooses to withdraw? Serafina asked. Then we would relocate our colonies to regions outside imperial space and resume our previous status as an independent civilization with no claim to territories under imperial authority. The Queen Princess studied Chen with an expression that seemed to combine amusement, and calculation in equal measure. Ambassador, you have managed to propose a solution that acknowledges imperial sovereignty while preserving Federation autonomy. This is either brilliant diplomacy or elaborate self-deception. Chen managed a slight smile. Your Highness, the test will be whether the arrangement serves the practical interests of both civilizations. If it does, the theoretical contradictions won't matter. If it doesn't, the theoretical elegance won't save it. Serafina laughed, a sound that seemed to release some of the tension that had been building throughout the unprecedented negotiation. Very well, Ambassador Chen. The Zephyrian Empire will establish this experimental relationship with the United Federation of Earth, governed by the terms we have discussed. She paused, looking directly into his eyes with an expression that combined imperial authority with something approaching personal respect. But understand this clearly. This arrangement exists only as long as it serves imperial interests. If humanity proves that cooperation produces better results than submission, this relationship will become the model for the Empire's future expansion. If you prove that cooperation is simply weakness disguised as sophistication, this experiment will end permanently. Chen bowed his head respectfully, recognizing both the opportunity and the warning inherent in her words. Your Highness, humanity will do everything possible to demonstrate that cooperation serves the interests of all civilizations involved. See that you do, Serafina replied. Because the future of not just humanity, but potentially every emerging civilization in the galaxy depends on the success of this unprecedented experiment. What neither she nor Chen could predict was how quickly that experiment would be tested, or how dramatically its results would reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. 6 months after the unprecedented agreement was signed in the crystal spires of Zephyr Prime, the true test of the experimental partnership arrived in the form of a crisis that neither the Zephyrian Empire nor the United Federation of Earth could have anticipated. The emergency began with a routine exploration mission that discovered something in the void between galaxies that would challenge everything both civilizations thought they knew about the universe. The first reports came from Captain Elena Rodriguez of the Federation exploration vessel Pathfinder, operating in the contested border region where human and Imperial space intersected. Her ship had been investigating unusual energy readings when they encountered something that defied all known physics, a massive structure that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, pulsing with energies that registered on sensors as both matter and antimatter simultaneously. Admiral Chen, Rodriguez reported over the quantum communication link to Federation headquarters. We're looking at something that our scientists say should be impossible. The structure appears to be artificially constructed, but it's composed of materials that don't exist in our periodic table. More importantly, it's moving toward populated space at a rate that suggests deliberate navigation. Admiral Marcus Chen, who had been promoted to head of Federation Defense Command after his successful diplomatic mission, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in his command center on Earth. "Captain, are you saying this structure appears to be a vessel of some kind?" "Sir, that's our best assessment. A vessel approximately the size of a small moon, constructed by unknown entities using impossible technology and heading directly toward the core systems of both the Federation and the Zephyrian Empire." The implications were staggering. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had been the dominant military force in known space, their technology so advanced that most civilizations considered them unbeatable. The idea that something existed with capabilities that dwarfed even imperial achievements was almost impossible to process. Chen immediately activated the emergency communication protocols that had been established as part of the experimental partnership agreement. Within hours, he was in direct contact with Commander Vexstar aboard the Imperial Dreadnought Dominion, which had been dispatched to investigate the same anomalous readings. Admiral Chen, Vexstar's mandibles clicked in a rapid pattern that indicated extreme stress. "Our preliminary analysis confirms your vessel's observations. We are facing a potential threat that exceeds anything in Imperial historical records. Commander, what's your assessment of Imperial capabilities against this, whatever it is?" The long pause before Vexstar's response told Chen everything he needed to know. "Admiral, the energy output of that structure is approximately 1,000 times greater than our most advanced battle stations. If it proves hostile, neither the Empire nor the Federation possesses sufficient military capability to oppose it directly." This was the moment that would test everything Ambassador Chen had argued during his historic meeting with Queen Princess Serafina. The experimental partnership between humanity and the Empire had been designed to handle normal diplomatic and economic challenges, not an existential threat that could potentially destroy both civilizations. On Zephyr Prime, Queen Princess Serafina received the reports with the same focused intensity she had shown during Chen's original visit. But now, instead of theoretical discussions about governance and cooperation, she was facing a practical crisis that could determine whether her empire would survive to celebrate its 3,001st year. "Minister Kael'thon," she commanded, "initiate immediate contact with the Federation leadership. Its situation requires coordination on a scale that has never been attempted between our civilizations." The elderly diplomat's expression was troubled. "Your Highness, our emergency protocols assume that the Empire will command any joint response to external threats. The Federation has never acknowledged Imperial authority in military matters." "Then perhaps it's time to discover whether their theory of cooperative partnership can function when facing extinction," Serafina replied grimly. "Because if this unknown entity proves hostile, neither civilization will survive without the other." The emergency conference that followed brought together the highest-ranking officials from both civilizations in the first truly equal strategic planning session in Imperial history. President Sarah Martinez represented the Federation, while Serafina spoke for the Empire, with their respective military and scientific advisors participating in real-time discussions that spanned multiple star systems. "Your Imperial Highness," President Martinez began, carefully observing the diplomatic protocols that had been established for the partnership. Federation scientists have completed preliminary analysis of the anomalous structure. Our findings suggest that we're dealing with a civilization whose technological development follows completely different principles than anything we've encountered.
Admiral Chen activated a holographic display showing the massive alien structure.
The entity appears to manipulate fundamental forces that our physics describes as impossible to control. They've somehow created a stable fusion of matter and antimatter, which should result in immediate annihilation, but instead produces a new form of energy that our instruments can detect but not measure. Commander Vextar's antennae twitched in agitation. Our Imperial scientists have reached similar conclusions. This suggests that the unknown civilization has developed beyond the technological paradigms that govern both human and Zephyrian achievement. Seraphina studied the displays with the calculating mind that had made her the youngest heir to the Crystal Throne in Imperial history. What are our defensive options? Limited, Admiral Chen replied honestly. Our combined military forces could potentially slow the entity's approach, but we lack the capability to stop or destroy it. Any effective defense would require technological breakthroughs that neither civilization can achieve independently. However, President Martinez added, there may be alternatives to direct military confrontation. The entity's trajectory suggests deliberate navigation, which implies intelligence. It may be possible to establish communication. Minister Calthon looks skeptical. Madam President, our translation protocols are designed for organic or silicon-based intelligence. This entity appears to operate on principles that we don't understand. Communication may be impossible. Not necessarily, Chen interjected. The Federation has experience with non-standard forms of intelligence. During our conflict with the AI Collective, we learned to communicate with entities that operated on completely different logical frameworks. The key is finding universal principles that transcend specific technological paradigms. Seraphina leaned forward, her interest clearly engaged. Explain. Mathematical relationships are universal, Chen continued. Any intelligence capable of interstellar travel must understand concepts like prime numbers, geometric relationships, and energy conservation. We might be able to establish basic communication using mathematical principles, even if we can't understand their underlying technology. Commander Vextar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Admiral, such an approach would require coordination between Federation and Imperial communication systems. Our technologies operate on incompatible frequencies, which is exactly why we need to work together, President Martinez observed. The Federation's adaptive communication protocols, combined with Imperial quantum transmission capabilities, might be able to reach this entity in ways that neither system could achieve alone. For the first time since the crisis began, Seraphina found herself genuinely optimistic about their prospects. Very well. We will attempt to establish communication with this entity using combined Federation and Imperial resources. But we must also prepare for the possibility that communication will fail. Your Highness, Admiral Chen said carefully, if communication fails and military opposition proves futile, there is one other option that might preserve both our civilizations, which is, Chen took a deep breath before continuing, evacuation. If we can't stop this entity, we might be able to relocate our populations to regions of space beyond its apparent area of interest. The suggestion created immediate tension in the conference. The idea that the mighty Zephyrian Empire might need to flee from a superior force was so contrary to Imperial history that several advisors looked physically uncomfortable. But Seraphina surprised everyone by nodding thoughtfully. Admiral, how many ships would be required for such an evacuation? For the Federation, approximately 5,000 vessels working continuously for 2 years. For the Empire, Chen paused, consulting his calculations. Given the scope of Imperial territory and population, probably 50 times that number. Which means, Seraphina concluded, that evacuation would only be possible if both civilizations pooled their resources and coordinated their efforts on a scale that has never been attempted in galactic history. President Martinez leaned forward. Your Highness, Are you suggesting that the survival of both our civilizations might depend on the kind of cooperation that Ambassador Chen proposed during your original meeting? I'm suggesting that the universe may be testing our theories about cooperation much sooner than we anticipated, Serafina replied. If we can't work together to address this crisis, neither civilization will survive to debate the merits of different governmental approaches. The next few days passed in a blur of unprecedented cooperation, as Federation and Imperial scientists worked together to establish communication with the alien entity. The technical challenges were enormous. Imperial quantum transmission systems had to be integrated with Federation adaptive protocols, while both sides shared scientific data that had previously been classified at the highest levels. Dr. Sarah Kim, the Federation's leading expert on xenolinguistics, found herself working alongside Imperial Science Advisor Veltan, a brilliant Zephyrian whose research had contributed to some of the Empire's most advanced technologies. Despite their vastly different backgrounds and the political tensions between their civilizations, they quickly developed an effective working relationship based on mutual respect for each other's expertise. The mathematical approach is working, Dr. Kim reported during one of the daily coordination conferences. We've successfully transmitted prime number sequences and received responses that indicate the entity recognizes the pattern. We're now attempting more complex mathematical relationships. Excellent progress, Advisor Veltan added. Imperial quantum analysis suggests that the entity is modifying its energy output in ways that correspond to our mathematical transmissions. This indicates not just intelligence, but sophisticated understanding of our communication attempts. The breakthrough came on the 7th day of the crisis, when the combined Federation-Imperial communication team successfully established two-way mathematical dialogue with the alien entity. The conversations were limited to basic concepts, but they revealed information that changed everything both civilizations thought they knew about the universe. The entity identified itself as a representative of what could only be described as a galactic gardener civilization, being so ancient and advanced that they had transcended the need for physical form millions of years ago. They traveled between galaxies, monitoring the development of younger civilizations and occasionally intervening when species reached critical evolutionary thresholds. The massive structure approaching human and Zephyrian space was not a weapon, but a research station designed to study the unprecedented cooperation that had developed between the two civilizations. The entity had been observing the experimental partnership with great interest, recognizing it as a potential solution to a problem that had plagued galactic development for eons. According to the entity's communications, most advanced civilizations eventually faced a choice between expansion through conquest or stagnation through isolation. Those that chose conquest eventually destroyed themselves through endless warfare, while those that chose isolation gradually declined until they became extinct. The partnership between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire represented a third option: cooperative expansion that allowed civilizations to grow without destroying each other. The entity's final message was both encouraging and ominous. The experiment between humanity and the Empire was being watched by intelligences throughout the galaxy, and its success or failure would determine whether younger civilizations would be allowed to continue their development or would be guided toward different evolutionary paths. As the massive structure departed as mysteriously as it had arrived, Queen Princess Serafina and President Martinez found themselves contemplating a future that neither had imagined when their civilizations first encountered each other. "Madam President," Serafina said during their final crisis coordination meeting, "it appears that our experimental partnership has become something much larger than either of us anticipated. Your Highness, I think we've discovered that the future of galactic civilization may depend on proving that cooperation is more powerful than conquest. That's a responsibility neither of our civilizations can handle alone." Serafina nodded slowly, her violet eyes reflecting the weight of possibilities that stretched across the galaxy. "Then perhaps it's time to make this experiment permanent and to invite other civilizations to join us in exploring what cooperative galactic development might achieve." The crisis that had threatened to destroy both civilizations had instead revealed their potential to reshape the galaxy itself. The human who had refused to bow in the crystal throne room had done more than preserve his species' dignity. He had opened a pathway to a future where strength was measured not by the ability to dominate others, but by the wisdom to work with them toward common goals. As news of the successful cooperation spread throughout known space, other civilizations began to reconsider their own approaches to expansion and diplomacy. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the greatest victories come not from forcing others to submit, but from having the courage to stand as equals and work towards something greater than any single civilization could achieve alone. The age of conquest was ending. The age of cooperation was about to begin. And it all started with a human who simply walked away when told to bow. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a universal truth that has governed interstellar politics for millennia. When summoned by nobility, you obey. When faced with the infinite power of an empire that spans 1,000 worlds, you submit. But what happens when someone simply walks away? The Zephyrian Empire had conquered countless species across the galaxy. Their royal bloodline had never been denied, never been questioned, and certainly never been ignored. For 3,000 years, their word had been absolute law, their desires fulfilled without question, their very presence demanding reverence from every sentient being in known space. Until the day a single human representative was summoned before Queen Princess Serafina Velnara, heir to the crystal throne of Zephyr Prime, and did something that shattered the foundation of everything the Empire believed about power, respect, and the natural order of the universe. He said no, and then he left. What followed would reshape the galaxy forever, proving that sometimes the greatest power lies not in demanding submission, but in having the courage to stand up and walk away when your dignity is on the line. This is the story of how one human's refusal to bow changed the fate of 1,000 worlds, and why the galaxy would never be the same again. The crystalline spires of Zephyr Prime stretched endlessly toward the purple sky, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 suns in patterns that had mesmerized visitors for countless generations. Within the highest tower of the Imperial Palace, Queen Princess Serafina Velnara sat upon her ceremonial throne, its surface carved from a single massive diamond that had taken artisans decades to perfect. Her elongated frame, typical of the Zephyrian royal bloodline, was draped in robes that seemed to capture starlight itself, and her forearms gestured gracefully as she reviewed the day's proceedings. The throne room was a monument to power. Holographic displays showed the locations of the Empire's 1,000 worlds, each one a testament to Zephyrian dominance. Courtiers from dozens of species lined the walls, their postures uniformly submissive, their eyes cast downward in the traditional show of respect. The air itself hummed with the energy of advanced technology that could level planets with a thought. Commander Vexstar, the Queen Princess's military advisor, approached the throne with the measured steps of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations. His 6 insectoid legs clicked against the polished floor as he delivered his report. "Your Imperial Highness," he began, his mandibles clicking in the formal tone reserved for addressing royalty, "the human delegation has arrived at the orbital station. They request permission to approach the palace." Serafina's violet eyes, which held the wisdom of centuries despite her relatively young age, of 400 years, narrowed slightly. The humans were a curiosity, a species that had emerged from a small blue planet on the outer rim of the galaxy and somehow managed to establish a modest federation of worlds. Their technology was primitive by Zephyrian standards, their military laughably small, and their diplomatic protocols refreshingly simple. "How many ships accompany their delegation?" she asked, her voice carrying the melodic quality that made Zephyrian speech so distinctive. "A single vessel, Your Highness. A small diplomatic craft with minimal armament. Our sensors detect only 50 life forms aboard." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembled courtiers. More importantly, bringing them into the imperial fold would send a clear message to other emerging civilizations that resistance to Zephyrian expansion was futile. The next few hours passed in the usual blur of imperial business. Seraphina reviewed reports from distant worlds, settled disputes between noble houses, and approved the construction of new battle fleets. The Zephyrian Empire was a vast machine that required constant attention to maintain, and as heir to the Crystal Throne, every decision ultimately fell under her authority. When the human delegation finally arrived at the palace, Seraphina was reviewing intelligence reports from the frontier systems. Minister Canthon, an elderly Zephyrian whose diplomatic career spanned 8 centuries, entered the throne room with measured steps that spoke of vast experience in managing delicate negotiations. "Your Imperial Highness," he said, executing the traditional bow that involved a complex arrangement of all 4 arms. "The human delegation has been escorted to the preparation chambers. Their leader requests a private audience to discuss matters of mutual benefit between our civilizations." Seraphina set aside her reports and fixed the minister with her piercing gaze. "Have they been properly instructed in court protocol?" "I have personally overseen their briefing, Your Highness. However," Canthon paused, his expression troubled, "there appears to be some confusion regarding the traditional gestures of respect. Their leader seems to believe this will be a meeting between equals." A silence fell over the throne room that was so complete it seemed to absorb sound itself. The very concept of equality with a member of the Zephyrian royal family was so foreign that many of the assembled courtiers struggled to process the statement. For 3 millennia, every species, every civilization, every sentient being that had encountered the Empire had understood their place in the natural hierarchy of the galaxy. Confusion? Seraphina's voice remained melodic, but those familiar with royal temperament could detect the dangerous undertone that had preceded the destruction of entire worlds. "Explain." The human leader, who identifies himself as Ambassador Marcus Chen, stated that his government does not recognize any authority beyond their own democratic institutions. He was polite but firm in his assertion that he would show respect but not submission to any foreign power, regardless of their technological superiority or territorial holdings. The implications of this statement rippled through the throne room like shockwaves from a stellar explosion. Some courtiers whispered among themselves in disbelief, while others simply stared in fascination at what they perceived to be an unprecedented diplomatic crisis in the making. Seraphina rose from her throne, her full height of nearly 8 feet imposing even by Zephyrian standards. Her robes shifted and flowed around her like liquid starlight as she descended the steps of the ceremonial dais. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 1,000 conquered worlds. "Bring the human to me immediately. I will personally educate this Ambassador Chen regarding the proper order of things in this galaxy." As Minister Canthon departed to escort the human delegation to the throne room, Seraphina considered the situation with the calculating mind that had made her father's most trusted advisor despite her youth. This Ambassador Chen clearly suffered from a misunderstanding about the reality of galactic politics. No doubt his species' isolation had left them ignorant of the basic principles that governed interactions between civilizations of vastly different capabilities. The correction would be swift and educational. The humans would learn their place in the imperial hierarchy, accept their role as another vassal state, and provide whatever resources or assistance the empire required. It was a pattern that had played out countless times throughout Zephyrian history, and Seraphina saw no reason why this encounter should be any different. She was about to discover just how wrong that assumption would prove to be. The great doors of the throne room opened with a sound like distant thunder, revealing Minister Cathon accompanied by 5 figures in simple dark uniforms that seemed almost primitive compared to the ornate dress of the imperial court. The humans appeared remarkably similar to several other bipedal species the Empire had encountered, though their lack of any obvious biological enhancements or adaptations suggested a relatively young evolutionary path. At the head of the delegation walked Ambassador Marcus Chen, a man of medium height with graying hair and eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings with analytical precision. His posture was confident, but not aggressive. and his expression suggested someone accustomed to dealing with complex negotiations under difficult circumstances. Delegation approached the throne, every eye in the room focused on the critical moment when the humans would demonstrate their understanding of proper protocol. The traditional supplication involved a complex series of movements that acknowledged the vast superiority of Zephyrian civilization and the honor being granted by the royal audience. Ambassador Chen stopped at the prescribed distance from the throne and looked directly into Seraphina's eyes with a steady gaze that showed neither fear nor submission. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the throne room, despite its relatively modest volume. Your Highness, I am Ambassador Marcus Chen, representing the United Federation of Earth and our allied worlds. I bring greetings from President Sarah Martinez and our democratically elected government, along with hopes for peaceful and mutually beneficial relations between our peoples. He remained standing upright, making no move toward the traditional gestures of submission that had been explained to him during the briefing. Instead, he offered a slight bow of the head that might have been appropriate for meeting another head of state, but was woefully inadequate for addressing Zephyrian royalty. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for eternity. Courtiers throughout the throne room held their breath, waiting to see how the Queen Princess would respond to this unprecedented breach of protocol. Some had witnessed the consequences of far lesser insults to imperial dignity, and none envied the position of the human delegation. Seraphina studied the ambassador with the same intensity she might direct toward a fascinating but potentially dangerous specimen. His complete lack of deference was so outside her experience that she found herself genuinely curious about the mental processes that could produce such behavior. Ambassador Chen, she said finally, her melodic voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. It appears there has been a misunderstanding regarding the proper protocols for this audience. Perhaps Minister Canthon's explanation was inadequate, or the translation protocols failed to convey the significance of the honors being extended to your delegation. Chen's expression remained politely attentive, but he showed no sign of embarrassment or concern about his supposed error. I believe the protocols were explained quite clearly, Your Highness. However, as a representative of a sovereign government, I am not authorized to perform gestures that might be interpreted as submission to foreign authority. I'm here to discuss potential cooperation between our civilizations as equals, not to negotiate the terms of our surrender. The word equals seemed to hang in the air like an unexploded weapon, its implications slowly spreading through the assembled courtiers like ripples through still water. Several of the more elderly advisors made subtle gestures that their younger colleagues recognized as prayers for divine protection from the wrath that was surely about to descend. But Seraphina surprised them all by laughing, a sound like crystal bells that somehow managed to convey both genuine amusement and mortal danger. Equals, Ambassador Chen, your species controls perhaps 20 star systems, while the Zephyrian Empire spans 1,000 worlds. Your most advanced warships would be classified as patrol craft by our military standards. Your entire civilization could be extinguished in a matter of days if we chose to make it so. In what possible sense do you consider us equals? Chen nodded thoughtfully, as if considering her points with genuine attention. You're absolutely correct about the disparity in our technological and military capabilities, Your Highness. However, equality in a diplomatic context doesn't refer to matching resources or firepower. It refers to the recognition that both parties have legitimate interests and the right to make decisions about their own future without coercion. He paused, letting his words settle before continuing. The United Federation has no desire for conflict with the Zephyrian Empire, but we also cannot accept a relationship based on intimidation or forced submission. We're prepared to discuss trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and mutual defense arrangements that benefit both our peoples. But we will not kneel to anyone, regardless of how many worlds they control. The throne room had become so quiet that the ambient hum of the palace's energy system seemed thunderously loud. Seraphina found herself in the unprecedented position of having her authority not just questioned, but calmly and systematically dismantled by someone who seemed completely immune to the power that had cowed entire civilizations. I see, she said, her voice taking on the silky tone that experienced courtiers recognized as extremely dangerous. "And what makes you believe that your principles outweigh the simple reality of power? What prevents me from having your delegation arrested and your worlds conquered for this insult to imperial dignity?" Ambassador Chen's response would determine not just the fate of the human delegation, but potentially the future of his entire species. Every person in the throne room waited to see whether he would finally acknowledge the vast gulf between human capabilities and Zephyrian power, or if his apparent madness would continue to drive him toward inevitable destruction. What happened next would be recorded in imperial histories for generations to come, though none of the witnesses could have predicted the true significance of the moment they were about to witness. Ambassador Chen met Seraphina's deadly gaze without flinching, his expression remaining calm despite the palpable tension that filled the throne room like a gathering storm. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had already calculated the risks and accepted the consequences. "Your Highness, you ask what prevents you from conquering our worlds, and the answer is both simple and complex." He gestured slightly toward the holographic displays showing the Empire's vast territories. "Nothing prevents you from destroying us militarily. This includes information about hostile species, pirate activities, resource conflicts, and any other factors that might affect Imperial security interests." "That's acceptable," Chen replied without hesitation. The Federation has always believed that shared intelligence improves security for everyone involved. Second, human colonies will coordinate their defensive activities with Imperial forces to ensure that Federation military actions don't inadvertently compromise broader Imperial strategies. Chen considered this requirement more carefully before responding. "We can agree to coordination and consultation, Your Highness, but we would need assurance that such coordination doesn't effectively place Federation forces under Imperial command. Our democratic institutions require that military decisions remain subject to civilian oversight." Seraphina nodded slowly, as if she had expected this response. "Coordination, not subordination. The Empire has no interest in micromanaging Federation internal affairs, but we cannot permit military activities that might destabilize regions under Imperial protection." "Understood and agreed," Chen confirmed. Third, the Federation will grant Imperial researchers access to human technological developments that might benefit the Empire, while the Empire will provide similar access to technologies that could improve Federation capabilities without compromising Imperial security. This requirement prompted a longer pause from Chen as he worked through the implications. "Your Highness, technological sharing would need to be governed by clear protocols that protect the core interests of both civilizations. Some Federation technologies are integrated with our democratic institutions in ways that might not be appropriate for Imperial use, while some Imperial technologies might not be compatible with Federation ethical standards." "Elaborate," Seraphina commanded. "Your technological superiority is undeniable, and I have no doubt that your fleets could reduce every human world to ash within a matter of weeks." Several courtiers exchanged glances, confused by what seemed to be a complete capitulation disguised as defiance. But Chen wasn't finished. "However, the real question isn't what you can do, but what you should do. The Zephyrian Empire has thrived for 3 millennia by incorporating useful civilizations into its structure, not by pointlessly annihilating potential assets. Destroying humanity would gain you nothing except 20 devastated systems and the reputation of being conquerors who kill rather than lead." He paused, allowing his words to resonate through the vast chamber. More importantly, it would demonstrate to every other emerging civilization in the galaxy that the mighty Zephyrian Empire feels threatened by a species that controls barely 20 star systems. That doesn't sound like the behavior of confident rulers to me. The silence that followed his statement was different from the previous quiet moments. This time, the assembled courtiers were processing not just the audacity of Chen's words, but their underlying logic. For the first time in the encounter, someone had presented Seraphina with an argument based on imperial interests rather than moral principles or abstract concepts of dignity. Commander Vextar stepped forward slightly, his mandibles clicking in a pattern that indicated deep concern. Your Highness, shall I have the human removed for his continued insolence? Seraphina raised one of her forearms in a gesture that commanded absolute stillness. Her violet eyes remained fixed on Chen as she considered his words with the same analytical precision she applied to military strategy or economic policy. The human had done something unprecedented. He had challenged her authority while simultaneously demonstrating his understanding of imperial logic. "Continue, Ambassador," she said finally. "Explain why the Zephyrian Empire should tolerate this unprecedented disrespect from a species that exists purely by our sufferance." Chen nodded respectfully. "Because, Your Highness, you're facing the same challenge that every successful empire throughout history has eventually encountered: the question of whether to rule through fear or through respect. Fear is certainly effective in the short term, but it creates enemies who will eventually unite against you when your power appears to wane. Respect, on the other hand, creates allies who will stand with you through difficult times because they benefit from your success." He gestured toward the holographic displays again. "The Zephyrian Empire controls 1,000 worlds. But how many of those worlds would actively defend the Empire if it faced a serious external threat? How many would remain loyal if your military power was temporarily compromised?" Fear-based relationships are inherently fragile because they depend entirely on the perception of invincibility. The implications of his questions rippled through the assembled courtiers like seismic waves. Several of the older advisors who had lived through multiple rebellions and pacification campaigns found themselves nodding slightly before catching themselves and resuming their properly neutral expressions. Seraphina leaned forward in her throne, her interest clearly piqued, despite the insulting nature of the conversation. "And you believe that humanity offers the Empire something more valuable than simple obedience?" "I believe humanity offers you the opportunity to demonstrate a different kind of leadership," Chen replied. "A relationship based on mutual benefit rather than coercion. Humans are naturally innovative and adaptable. We've developed solutions to problems that other species might not even recognize. Our democratic institutions have created stable governments that survive leadership transitions without civil war. Our cultural diversity has produced artistic and scientific achievements that could enrich imperial civilization." He paused, watching her reaction carefully before continuing. "But more importantly, an alliance with humanity would show other emerging civilizations that the Zephyrian Empire is confident enough in its own strength to treat potential partners as equals rather than subjects. That kind of confident leadership tends to attract voluntary cooperation rather than forced compliance." Minister Kael'thon stepped forward, his ancient features creased with concern. Your Highness, while the ambassador's arguments are creative, we cannot ignore the precedent this would establish. If one species is permitted to address imperial authority as an equal, others will demand the same treatment. The entire structure of the empire could be undermined." Chen turned to address the minister directly. "With respect, Minister, I think you're underestimating the Zephyrian Empire's strength. A truly powerful civilization doesn't need to demand submission because its superiority is self-evident. When humanity encounters a more advanced species, we don't require them to bow before we'll trade with them. We simply recognize that they have advantages we can learn from and benefits we can offer in return." "But the natural order of things," Kael'thon began, "is determined by results, not ceremonies," Chen interrupted gently. "The Zephyrian Empire didn't become great because other species bowed to you. You became great because you built something worth respecting. The bowing came afterward, as a symbol of that respect. But symbols without substance eventually become meaningless rituals." Seraphina stood abruptly, her full height casting a shadow across the throne room that seemed to darken the very air around her. For a moment, the assembled courtiers braced themselves for the explosion of royal wrath that had been building throughout the unprecedented encounter. Instead, she began to pace, her forearms gesturing as she worked through the complex implications of Chen's arguments. The clicking of her ceremonial shoes against the crystalline floor created a rhythm that seemed to match her thought processes. "You present an interesting perspective, Ambassador." she said finally. But you seem to misunderstand something fundamental about imperial authority. The ceremonies and protocols you dismiss as meaningless rituals serve a vital function in maintaining order across 1,000 worlds. Without clear hierarchies and established procedures, the empire would fragment into chaos within a generation. Chen nodded respectfully. I understand the importance of structure and protocol, Your Highness. Human governments have similar challenges in maintaining unity across multiple worlds and diverse populations, but there's a difference between functional hierarchy and symbolic submission. Your military officers follow orders because the command structure serves a practical purpose. They don't bow because bowing makes them better soldiers. And what would you propose as an alternative? Serafina asked, her voice carrying genuine curiosity despite the dangerous edge that remained. How should the Empire interact with species that refuse to acknowledge their proper place in the galactic order? By demonstrating why alliance with the Empire serves their interests better than opposition or isolation, Chen replied immediately. Humanity doesn't need to bow to recognize that Zephyrian technology could improve our medical systems, or that imperial trade networks could expand our economic opportunities, or that your military expertise could help us defend against hostile species in our region. Every member of our team volunteered for this mission because they believed that peaceful cooperation with the Zephyrian Empire would benefit both our peoples. That's the kind of motivation that creates lasting partnerships rather than temporary compliance. Commander Vexstar's antennae twitched in agitation. Your Highness, this entire discussion is predicated on the assumption that the Empire requires anything from humanity. Our technological superiority makes their contributions negligible. Chen turned to address the commander directly. With respect, Commander, that assumption might be worth examining. Every species in the galaxy has encountered challenges that their own perspective and capabilities couldn't solve. Humans have faced extinction-level threats multiple times in our history, and each time we survived by finding creative solutions that others had overlooked, such as Vexstar challenged. Our homeworld was invaded by an AI collective that had absorbed 17 other civilizations. Everyone told us that resistance was futile because we couldn't match their computational power or manufacturing capacity. But we won by doing something they didn't expect. We turned off all our technology and fought them with improvised weapons and unpredictable tactics. The collective couldn't adapt to opponents who deliberately rejected the advantages of advanced technology. The throne room had grown quiet again as courtiers processed this revelation. The idea that a primitive species could defeat an advanced AI collective through deliberate technological regression was so counterintuitive that many found it difficult to accept. Another example, Chen continued, involved a plague that our scientists couldn't cure using conventional medical approaches. We solved it by studying the social behaviors of an apparently non-intelligent species that had developed natural immunity. Sometimes the solution to a complex problem comes from an unexpected source. Serafina had stopped pacing and was studying Chen with the intense focus she usually reserved for strategic planning sessions. You're suggesting that humanity's lack of advanced development might actually represent an asset to the Empire? I'm suggesting that diversity of thought and experience is always valuable when facing unknown challenges. The Zephyrian Empire has achieved remarkable things through the application of superior technology and organized military power. But what happens when you encounter a problem that can't be solved through those methods? Wouldn't it be useful to have allies who approach difficulties from completely different angles? The Queen Princess returned to her throne, but instead of the formal pose she had maintained throughout the audience, she sat in a more relaxed position that suggested genuine engagement with the discussion. And in return for this, diversity of thought, humanity expects to be treated as an equal partner in imperial affairs. Humanity expects to be treated as a sovereign civilization capable of making our own decisions about our future, Chen corrected carefully. We're not seeking equality in terms of territory, technology, or military power. We're seeking respect for our right to exist and govern ourselves according to our own values and traditions. The Queen Princess expected a supplication, but the human left HFY Stories. Best HFY Stories.